The research began with a question, and the question was, can we enforce traffic law while at the same time keeping people on our side and actually enhance the perception that people have about what the police are trying to do in the short term and even in the long term, and perhaps even increase their cooperation and collaboration with traffic law over the long term.
We started out with a focus group, interestingly enough, and this was at the request of RCPD. They wanted to know, what do citizens think about traffic violations and regulations in the town of Manhattan? And we started out with actually about 10 different groups. We wanted a wide perspective of interests and representations around the community. And we found something really surprising, that they really were interested in safety, traffic safety.
The research was designed around the principles of procedural justice. We took the 4 elements, starting with voice, and we asked the question, how can we construct a traffic enforcement strategy around procedural justice? And so the first question with voice is, how do you give the community a voice when you're talking about traffic enforcement? So what we did was K-State conducted a series of focus groups, and they asked the focus group participants, what do you want RCPD to focus in on? What do you want the police to focus in on when it comes to traffic enforcement? And they came up with a list of 5 things that they considered really important. About the same time, we were conducting internal research to find out what were the most likely causes of accidents. Is it location, is it behavior, or it's certain people? And we saw different trends, but the biggest one we found was behavior. There was about 5 different behaviors that resulted in traffic accidents.
We did pretty much a quasi-experimental design, which is fairly rare in policing. As you know, there's a lot of ethical reasons and actually reasons of practicality and safety as well. But we were able to come up with a really reasonable kind of pre-test, post-test. We also had a control group by calling citizens that had recently been stopped by RCPD. So we had that pre-test, and there was the intervention of the procedural justice training, and then we had a post-test after the officers were trained. So that made a really interesting pre-post kind of scenario that we could test. And what we found is that the officers who were using procedural justice scripts and interactions with the citizens were perceived as much more effective by the citizens. They were happier about it, whether or not they received a citation. That's a pretty good mark of success. But also that they felt like the police were interested in the community. So there was sort of a generalizing effect as well. We were really pleased with that.
And when we compared what the public wanted us to do and focus on, and we found what caused accidents from a behavior standpoint, they overlapped really, really well. So that's the voice aspect. And then the next question was, during traffic stops, how can we give people a sense that we are being fair, everyone gets treated the same, neutrality, and then also that our motives are trustworthy. And of course, we'd always want to treat people with dignity and respect at our traffic stops. So we began to design a program where officers would be trained on talking about, because procedural justice typically is dialogue-based. The officers would talk about these subjects during traffic stops.
Okay, so a few years back, we actually did a survey with K-State to kind of ask people, hey, what violations do you expect the police to stop cars for?
Yes, sir.
And one of the top 5 was using cell phones while they're driving.
Yes,
so that's why we focus on those.
Okay.
Now, incidentally, when we look at the top reasons that cause accidents, people on their phones is
Yes,
one
sir.
of the top 5.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to cut it back.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
just like I just was picking a song. And
Right, I got you.
Yeah,
So, but that's why we focus on that, because people expect us to stop people for that, and it causes accidents.
Don't worry.
It was an 8-hour training session, and the way it was designed was that we spent a couple of hours talking about procedural justice in general. We talked about attitudes and perceptions of public, especially post-Ferguson. And so we talked about the need for procedural justice and why it's so important. We got into the nitty-gritty of the research with procedural justice, particularly some work that was done in Australia in reference to sobriety checkpoints. And so then we finally introduced the results of the focus groups, what the public wanted us to do, and then we took a look at our internal accident data. So, and finally, and it's kind of a logic train. What we're trying to do is take the officers on this journey, and so by the time we got to the end, you could see well, this just makes sense. This is what we should do. You're telling me this is what the public wants us to do. This is what causes accidents, and this is where accidents are occurring. Well, it just kind of makes sense that this is what we would focus on, and this is what we would talk about.
The officers were trained to incorporate the elements of procedural justice into a script, but a script of their own making that they were comfortable with. We didn't want to prescribe a step-by-step, you must say this, you must say this, and have it be something very robotic. We wanted them to own, in their own words, but have these elements of procedural justice in them. The trustworthy motives, the unbiased decision-making, treating people with dignity and respect, and of course, we had the voice element very strongly in this.
Good evening.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine. I'm Officer Manning, Riley
Yes.
County Police Department. So right now here in Manhattan and Riley County, we're at a 5-year high for preventable accidents.
Yes, I was just in an accident the other day. I
You
understand.
were? Okay.
Yep,
So,
someone crashed in the back of me.
we're trying to do everything we can to do to curb that. So something we had done a couple years ago, we had the sociology department at Kansas State University, did a study for us around town, kind of surveyed a lot of folks, asking them specifically, hey, what do you think the cops should enforce that would help reduce accidents? What violations? And one of the top 5 things they came back with was speed. It matches our accident data too. It's one of the top 5 causes. So I'll let you keep working on the insurance, but as long as that's good and everything comes back in your license okay,
Yeah.
all you get today is just a speeding ticket, okay?
Okay.
All right.
So you can see as we go through this, I've talked about we want to reduce accidents. I mentioned that. We talked about giving the public a voice. And then we've also discussed that everybody in some way gets treated the same.
We learned that interactions between police and their citizens is absolutely crucial. And that when we put in enough experience, forethought, and scientific rigor, we can manage that in a very productive way that's going to benefit the community as a whole.
The key takeaway from the research is that words matter. Very short, purposefully delivered talking points make a huge difference in people's minds.
The next level is very clear, to try to track a change in behavior, because if you can establish that not only did perceptions change, but behavior changed also, then it's very strong evidence that a training program that focuses on procedural justice during the course of traffic stops can increase the legitimacy of a police department. And then it can also extend to other police-citizen interactions as well, pedestrian stops, casual exchanges, couching all the actions that we take, whether they're enforcement or non-enforcement, in the terms of procedural justice and the elements of that.